This is the closing plenary of our two-day conference. Suffice it to say that the members of the panel are keenly aware that as the members of the final plenary panel, their job is to engage you, to interest you, to keep you entertained, and to inform. And we have actually a wonderful panel.
And awake.
And awake. A wonderful panel that I'm sure will do that. The topic is the trades, a great choice for someone else's kids. We've heard a great deal during the conference about the general theme of why is it that so few kids or young people appear to go into the trades, and what can we do to fix that or to get more students entering and completing an apprenticeship and entering the trades. We've heard some speakers suggest that it's the fault of the parents. Some speakers suggest that it's the fault of the characteristics of the millennium young generation. We've heard some people suggest that it's the fault of the system. What we do know, and we've heard actually this morning that apparently to do well into the trades, you have to go to a bar and drink a lot of whiskey. What we do know for sure, you see now the panel's activated. What we do know for sure is that Ontario as a province leads all provinces in Canada in terms of university participation and college participation, but interestingly enough has among the lowest participation rates in the trades of any province in Canada. So something here is amiss. And to help us understand what might have led to the situation we find ourselves in, and more importantly, what we might think or consider to fix it and to get more students into the trades, we have three people who have thought a great deal and know quite a bit about this. Linda Franklin from Colleges Ontario, Annie Kidder from People for Education, and Sean Reid from the Progressive Contractors Association of Canada. I'm going to give each of our panelists a couple of minutes at the front end to say what they think is the most important thing that they would like to tell this assembled group on the topic. We'll then have a general discussion. We have circulated some questions that we would like them to comment on, and I will facilitate that conversation. We will leave time for questions from the audience, and we will give them a chance to wrap up in the end. So without any further ado, Linda, how about I pass it to you?
Perfect, thanks. Well, when Harvey told me we were going last and we had to keep people energized and entertained, I immediately thought of PowerPoint because, really. And I thought if I could simply marry some PowerPoint to charts and graphs. I know, it's almost too much to bear. So I don't want to overdo it because I know it can be very powerful in a room like this. But I thought I might start with a few PowerPoint charts and graphs. So by then you will all be energized, leaping out of your seats. Everybody who's left will feel sick that they've done that. But I thought it might also put some of this conversation in context. So first of all, colleges, as you know, are at the forefront of training for apprenticeship. We do almost 90% of the in-school training, so we watch this a lot. And our organization over the years has asked parents a lot of questions like, if you had your choice, where would you send your kid? Now, way back when, 2008, we weren't even asking them about apprenticeship because we thought, oh dear God, it's going to be so bad. But even asking them about college or university, there's clearly a big split. Way more people, way more parents preferred their son or daughter to go to university than college. And if you married that with, of course, the stats on how many actually go to university versus to college or to apprenticeship, you can see there isn't a very good correlation between them. The parents' aspirations were very much university. The equation in their head was very much success for my child equals university. So fortunately, fast forward a couple of years, the recession, the work that colleges have done over the years, the changing perception of work has changed a lot. So this is just a couple of years ago. We asked a very big sample of people, what's the best way to help a young person succeed in the world in terms of post-secondary? And guess what? It's a combination of college and university, or it's to get a skilled trade. So people certainly understand today, something that probably they didn't understand even 7 or 8 years ago, that in fact there are lots of routes to good careers. They've also changed their view about the function and role of post-secondary education generally. So it used to be, again, 10 years ago if we asked this question, what's the value of it? People would say self-actualization, to become a good global citizen, to find myself. Nobody cares about that now. What they care about is get my kid out of that basement. The only way to do it is to get a job. So the only reason I'm sending them post-secondary education is to get a darn job. So that's a big change. And again, if you look at it by household income, the less money you make, the more you want your kid out of the basement earning money, because probably the share of groceries that you're spending is gone through the roof, and you would really like that to stop now. So again, the more challenged your financial health is, the more you feel if you're sending your kids to post-secondary and you're spending probably a lot of your hard income trying to help them get there, they better find career success at the end of it. The other interesting thing that I think talks a little bit to people's changing attitudes about the skilled trades and that kind of education is that years ago and today, people still feel that their education, so if you're a parent of a teenager, you feel that your education prepared you pretty darn well for the world of work and your career came along partly because of that. But how do you think we're doing now? Not so well. 6% of people think we're doing a very good job in post-secondary education of getting people ready for the real world. So it means, I think, that people are changing their attitudes and their minds about what equals success, how you get there, and what the routes for their children are. And some of this is borne out, I think, by the fact with thanks to the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, their report, which is just a few months old, we like to think, actually, that the big problem facing the trades is that guidance counselors are standing in the way of progress, and they simply don't know about them, and if they did know about them, they wouldn't like them very much, and they would never offer them up as an option to kids. Clearly, that's not true. We certainly don't find that. The colleges do an awful lot of work in secondary schools and with guidance counselors. We do a lot of it in partnership. And I think the result is that people generally say they know more about the trades than they used to. There's more information available. And when you look at how you compare parents and young people around their awareness of the trades and their interest in them, just again, 10 years ago versus today, awareness is a lot higher, interest is a lot higher. This one, to me, is the most interesting slide. The prestige of the skilled trades has really changed. When we asked this question 15 years ago, you would not have seen that kind of a pie chart. So again, what's the equation for success for my kid? Get a good job. Trades get you a good job. I should think differently about them. So I think it casts a bit of a different light on our conversations today. There's, I think, a lot of discussion that we have to have as a panel about, how do you change generally attitudes more? Because even though a lot of parents now say they are open to this idea, that they recognize that the trades are a route to a good job, I suspect that a lot of them, when they're offering counseling to their sons and daughters, it's still not the first thing they suggest to them that they should look at. I would put to you just one theory from our perspective. I think part of the problem is that even though apprenticeship is part of post-secondary education, parents don't understand it as such. And part of that reason is because of how we go about it. It's incredibly complicated. If you want to go to a college or a university, you go to one website in Ontario, you click a button, you press what you want, you pay your fee, and you wait for somebody to accept you. If you are an apprentice, good luck to you. You roam the streets of your community looking for an employer to hire you. If you don't have a parent that was in the trades, good luck. I thought Pat's comment yesterday about how he pulled in a chit to help somebody, I think he meant that to deliver maybe a bit of a different message than it delivered to me, which is, boy, connections really matter if you want to figure out how to get into a skilled trade. You go to the ministry, what ministry, who in the ministry, where are they, by the way, to figure out whether you can get in, and by some magic, if you pass all those hurdles, eventually somebody tells you where you might be able to go and when. So if you are a parent of a child that's interested in a skilled trades and you look down the street and you see that your neighbor's kid clicked a button, paid a fee, and got an acceptance, and your daughter or son is going through hoops to try to figure it out, it's not going to feel very much like post-secondary education to you, frankly. If there's no credential at the end that sounds like diploma or degree, it's not going to feel very much like post-secondary education. And if it's not sort of an open process where everybody understands the rules, it's not going to feel much like post-secondary education. So I have lots more ideas, but there's a starting point for me.
Thank you. Annie.
Okay. I don't have PowerPoint. I said I was going to do an interpretive dance to keep people, but I'm not really either. So that was really interesting. My children aren't in the basement, but I'm still paying their rent. I decided at least they're somewhere else because there's no wet towels on the floor. And that's really, in the end, all I really cared about because I couldn't stand it anymore. So I have not been a successful parent, I guess, in that way. I'm not at all an expert on skilled trades or apprenticeships. I'd just like to acknowledge that right from the very beginning. So I'm not speaking from knowledge of that. So you should listen to that presentation. That was knowledge and evidence, always a good thing. But in my organization, we have been looking at skills for the last year, quite a lot. And we've been looking at how we describe success. It's really interesting, the change then in terms of, what we think success is, how we set goals for success in kindergarten to grade 12, and in particular, how we measure the goals that we've set, measure our progress as we're working towards those goals. And I think, I know, the thing that struck us the most in the last year, which we've been kind of wrestling with for a long time, is the hierarchy in K-12 education, and maybe it's in all education about, this is really important, this is kind of important, or we sort of care about it if you have time once you've done the really important thing, and way down on the bottom are the things that maybe you can do. In K-12 education, we measure reading, writing, and math. And by measuring those things, we say, these are the most important things. These are the basics. You have to have these first before anything else. This is what we value in education. And then we kind of start with that. We measure that politically. Those are the goals we set. We say, we promise party X or Y. We're going to get the scores up to X or Y over the course of 4 years. In education, K-12 education, more I think than post-secondary, we love a graph. We love a graph that can go in the newspaper that's kind of up good, down bad. And we like to describe education that way. Our quest in People for Education right now is to develop a broader set of goals and actually develop measures to go with those goals about a broader set of skills, and they are skills. Reading, writing, and math are incredibly important. There's a bunch of other skills that unfortunately are called soft or non-cognitive or even worse, social or emotional. All that sounds kind of sucky and not very important, so it's or something nice that maybe you get from home, but those couldn't really be important skills. And probably even beneath those soft, sucky skills are hands-on skills that might get you an actual job. And I'm an old parent, so I think I made, maybe it's baby boomers who've changed that graph, because when your children are younger, you're not thinking about whether or not they get jobs. In fact, you take kind of umbrage at the idea that education is for employment. And as they get older, you realize you only care whether or not they have a job, and you actually don't care about their self-actualization at all. It's like, I don't give a shit. Do you have a job? And can you start paying your own rent, please? But in fact, it's a false dichotomy, I hope. We want both things. Success is a combination, obviously. What we've seen in public education over the last few years is this tendency then to focus on what we measure, but also, I think, as importantly, in this discussion, when we're talking about work or what kids do, we have a tendency to sort of only focus on the kind of last year of high school or the last couple of years. What are we doing in high school, and why aren't more kids going into trades or getting more sort of hands-on learning? And to me, when I look at this hierarchy, I go, it actually starts in grade 1. And that's what we have to look at in terms of what we value in terms of education. And even when we look at the so-called soft skills, in kindergarten, we measure, in fact, through various things, one being the early development instrument, we measure a lot of those socio-emotional skills. We really, really care about them. We think they're incredibly important, and then you turn 6 and We don't care about those at all anymore. We care about whether or not you can read and write and do math. And we don't even care so much about whether you're doing a good job playing in the sandbox or playing with blocks. We care about these things, and we start to value them. And we tell kids, this is important by what we do and what we measure. These are important, these are less important. When we started doing our work, it was in 1998. All of funding changed for education, and one of the ways that funding changed, and this is a weird kind of relationship, but it's what happened, is that we had provincial funding, which is a good thing because it made it more equitable across the province, but we started to fund the school buildings per square foot of space per child. So I think in elementary schools you get 120 square feet per kid. But it was how we defined classrooms that made the change. So there used to be, when we first started keeping track, about a quarter of the elementary schools with grades 7 and 8 had design and technology programs. They were great programs, they were hands-on, and they had family studies, formerly home economics. Both hands-on, both a lot of knowledge about living in the world. Maybe they would have learned to pick up their wet towels, who knows. But over the course of not very many years, those courses pretty well disappeared out of grade 7 and 8. So then again, going back, not just focusing on high school, but looking at elementary school, suddenly we've taken away, so now it's less than 5% of schools with grade 7 and 8 have design and technology courses because they didn't fund the rooms for design and technology. People built brand new schools with these huge, fancy, wonderful rooms with a lot of stuff in them for hands-on learning, and suddenly they were being penalized because it looks like empty space in your school. So that change happened in elementary school, and that was an incredibly important thing. We also think that when kids get to high school, that we're dividing them very, very young. And in our division, because most parents, no matter what socioeconomic background they come from, they do say, my kid's going to go to university. They have this assumption about their kid. We end up streaming, basically, kids starting in grade 9. We've done a lot of work looking at it, and it does end up quite a bit being based on class. But even the streaming, because of a variety of issues in the kind of applied stream, doesn't seem to be it's not really preparing kids to go on to skilled trades. In fact, they're much less likely to be successful in those applied courses in grade 9 and 10, no matter how they were doing in elementary school. So we've looked at a lot of work all around the world and gone, you know what, we shouldn't be dividing kids in grade 9 and 10, but we should be making sure there's enough room in their timetables to be able to take hands-on courses in grade 9 and 10 so that we're not, again, reinforcing this idea that these are the important things, and these are the things either that you do if you can't do anything else or that you do if you have time all around it. So for me, it has to do with the hierarchy. It's a combination, when you asked whose fault it was, it's a combination of all of our fault, which everything always is, so that we need to pressure our politicians and our policymakers to say we need to stop dividing in that way. We need to think about it personally ourselves, about our own children, and stop being quite so snobby about, well, I really want you to be this. I meet a lot of parents now I'm very old and my children are old, who are going, oh God, whoever has gone back to school to be a pipe fitter, and you go, lucky you, mine's an actress, so, if only she were a pipe fitter. She's really nice, I'm sorry, but so that we have to do that as parents. But it's a societal change too, and to me it has to do with what we value as education, and I don't think it's one thing or the other. I do think that understanding yourself is incredibly important, but I also think getting a job is incredibly important, and that what we need to look at then is what are the core skills, what are the skills underneath all the other skills that enable you to keep on learning no matter what you end up getting into, that we don't, I hope, ever want to become like British Columbia, where I'm from, and it's a lovely place, but where they've decided to spend billions of dollars preparing people just to work in liquefied natural gas, which is already looking like a bad idea, and they only just made the change last year. But that we're not preparing people for a particular skill necessarily in our K-12 system, but that we're preparing them very, very well for a whole range of things, and we're not valuing one over the other as much as we do now. Okay.
I guess I'll stand up too. I hope we're not going to stand up every time we answer questions, but no.
She did it first,
Sorry.
so then
Oh,
I
it's
have
good.
to do
It's
it.
good. So I'm going to pick up, I guess, from Linda's story about. So you've gone through, you've gone on the websites, you've figured out what trade you want to be in. You go through, you find a college provider that can do that. You even identify an employer that you would like to go and work for. In some cases, in some trades, you can actually do the training first and then go and try and get work. So what happens next? And that's the preoccupation that our association has, is what happens at the employer experience. And so I'm going to just point to an example that happened that I just saw on the web yesterday. CBC in St. John's, Newfoundland report, I don't know if you saw this story. A single mother looking to pay for her family and cover the income of her family, went back to school because she'd done the labor market research to determine that welding was a high demand trade, which it is, high demand trade. And she did the research. She went to a local training provider. She got her welding certificate. And then the way welding works, at least in Newfoundland, is then she went and approached a company called Paul Murphy Services. And that company said to her, this is really not for you. Welding is actually a man's job. And then she took that to the CBC, which is an understandable thing to do. And the CBC reporter then called and this is a job that has an open application, and said, I'm interested in this job. And the CBC reporter was a woman. And the same recruiter said, well, this is a man's job. It's dirty. It's not for you. And so, this is horrible. I would hope that would be the extreme, but something tells me it's not the extreme. And so the problem that we're preoccupied with at PCA is there's a disconnect between employers that, like the ones that I represent and across the construction industry, who are every day waving our arms around saying, we have a skills shortage, we need more people in the trades. And yet we're not actually doing what we need to do to attract the trade. In fact, we're telling people stay away from our industry. So there's a real disconnect. Our concern is what kind of workplace environments are we creating? So we can provide all the labor market information, to educate people on the opportunities. We can say how much they're going to make. But then when the first day they step into, for their apprenticeship, and they step into a company that, doesn't say, what the most important thing you're going to do today is get on your health and safety training and your health and safety orientation. Doesn't say, here's all the proper equipment you need. Doesn't say that, we treat people with respect in this place. Here's how you're expected to conduct yourself with professionalism, punctuality. Instead, what too many people do is they walk in and they're lost. And they're, sometimes they're in this sort of disheveled workplace. They hear all kinds of crazy stuff coming out of people's mouths. And they think, well, this is what I got to do. So one of two things happens. One is they either choose to embrace that because they got to get a job and they got to pay, they got to make a living, and they morph themselves into that thing. Or they say, no, I'm not going to have anything to do with this. I'm out of here. And that's why you get all these, these people bailing after 2 months of their apprenticeship. It's because they come in and the culture, regardless of all the wonderful statistics that say this is a great opportunity, their experience of a workplace culture in the trades is so negative. So that's our concern is we cannot, as employers, be waving our arms around saying we got a skill shortage that needs addressing, and government, you need to help us, and colleges, you need to help us, if we're not actually first looking at ourselves and saying, are we actually making our work environments attractive? So that's I think when we're talking about perceptions of the trades and what needs to change, a lot of it starts with us.
Thank you. So let me ask you a question of each of you. First off, Linda, you show that over the last 10 years, attitudes seem to be changing. Something about the reputation or profile of the trade is changing. It's a two-part question. What caused the change? Why are things changing? And B, are they changing at a pace that, in your opinion, is going to it will solve this, or we have to do something to either accelerate this or something else?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I have to say, I think the recession changed a lot of this. It certainly changed people's perception around college education as well, because of that connection to a good job, and maybe university isn't a guarantee anymore of a good job. Certainly, as we've sent more and more people to university, not thinking about what's the connection between that and the job market, I think that's become more clear to parents. So I think that's been part of it. The recession has been very focusing for people about where they want their young people to aim. I think, frankly, just like culinary, the advent of shows like Brian Baumler, there's a good-looking guy standing up there. Wouldn't you want to be him? Did any of the rest of you notice the flood of the students up to take selfies with Brian Baumler and share with their friends? Looks a lot like how our presidents are reacting to Justin Trudeau these days. So, otherwise sane people, right, who in celebrity find something. So I think that cult of celebrity now, both for culinary and for construction and the skilled trades, is helping change people's immediate perception of them. Is it enough? I don't think so, because even though, as you say, I said at the beginning, a lot of parents are more open to the trades now, it's interesting when you put them in focus groups, they don't speak very highly of their interest in their son or daughter going into the trades until you wrap it around a discussion of, it's higher education. It's a post-secondary choice. When they start to think of the trades as post-secondary, you can see an almost immediate change in how they start to message and think about it. So I think language matters as we go forward. I tell you, the last interview with CBC I heard that almost drove me off the road was one that Annie did a couple of months ago. But it was an epiphany for me, because she was talking about the challenges of the applied stream in high school and how you should be cautious as a parent. Remember this interview of directing your kid to applied education or the applied stream? And I thought, oh my God, in the high schools, applied is a pejorative term that parents would certainly not want their children engaged in. And when we move them to post-secondary now, applied has become a very important and positive badge of education. So I think we have a really interesting challenge right now, as Annie said, if we're trying to message to these young people from public school on. But part of that messaging is, geez, if you take an applied stream, yikes. It's hard to turn off that switch when they flip over into post-secondary and say, actually in grade 12, start thinking about applied as a great thing. And certainly the trades are all applied post-secondary education. So I think we need to fix this. And the last thing I would just say is, interestingly enough, I think there's a correlation in terms of people's attitudes to the price of this particular branch of post-secondary education. So if you imagined a universe that will not exist in my lifetime, where we had no more apprentices, all these young people going through these streams of education were co-op students studying to get a diploma or a degree and do work terms in between that led them to a trade, we would not be having this discussion today about whether parents would be accepting of that or not. They would be lined up around the block to sign their kids up into these co-ops. But we have an apprenticeship system because it's the cheapest possible way of educating young people to become tradespeople. And I think as long as that funding equation is in play, it's a bit challenging. It's challenging because it looks like a cheap version of post-secondary, and somehow cost equals value in people's minds. And secondly, because it allows, I think, the government to not put the attention needed on the skilled trades as a post-secondary option. I couldn't believe we're just starting to talk about retention rates in apprenticeship. How long have we been talking about them in university and colleges? So I think there are a lot of those things going on, Harvey, and I think all of them mean ultimately that we've made progress, but there's a long way to go, and a lot of reorienting of our thinking, our language, and our approach to training that would make a difference.
So Annie, tell us about the degree to which the work that you're doing on defining and measuring important outcomes in elementary or secondary has been attentive to trades.
Well, we haven't described it that way, and first I have to talk about the bad CBC interview that nearly caused you to drive off the road, because I think it's really interesting, because to us in the end there's a kind of marketing branding problem across the board in terms of skills. That we call something skills and other things not skills or something, and then we value them differently. And I think that applied courses in grade 9 and 10 in high school it's a total misuse of the name is really what it is. They're not actually that. They're really the courses in math and in English for kids who aren't going to do well in the. They're not designed that way. They're not actually applied courses. There's nothing really about them that are applied. It's like, I want to do the easy course. And that's how they're seen by students, or they're assumed by the sort of expectations that you can only do those courses because they're easy. And in fact, you're much more likely to fail in those courses. So I think the name is bad, and it goes back to that sort of branding thing. For us, in terms of what we're measuring or what we're suggesting should be measured in school, it has less to do with a particular thing like skilled trades or a particular form of learning, and more about defining the broad base of skills that we think should underlie everything. So even if you think of creativity and innovation, which is one of the domains that we're looking at, if you think of those skills that go into building those capacities in kids, which are, I look at a physical problem, I try and figure out how I'm going to solve that problem, I have a bunch of materials, I put them together in various ways, I fail, I figure it out, that I'm not necessarily learning, it's not an apprenticeship, it's not teaching me a particular skill, but it's giving me the bottom level skills. So that in the domains that we've looked at, which are health, physical and mental health, creativity and innovation, citizenship, social emotional learning, and all of the skills in there, we in the research that we've done, we've gone these plus being able to read, write, and do math go through everything else. And that if we could somehow rebrand and try and work on this idea that some things are important and some things aren't, that what we could be graduating then are kids who've experienced a lot of different things and who have the core competencies that can actually take them where they need to go. That what we really want is kids who can learn stuff. And we want them to have all of the various pieces that they need to have in order to be able to learn. And some of those are very, very concrete. Some of those things are less concrete. But for us, it doesn't have to do, knowledge is obviously very, very important. But there are a bunch of other sort of cross skills that are real. They are concrete. You can measure them. They are measurable outcomes of education.
Sean, your message begs the question. How do you educate employers? I mean, if actually, I found your message quite depressing, because even if everything went well, then they'd go into the trades, and that would be the end of it.
Well, hopefully it's not depressing.
Okay, so
because the reality is there are employers that do a superb job. I think it is. There's a few ways, right? So, labor has a role to play, and we've heard about that throughout this court, where they have responsibility to their members to say, you know what, you need to do your part, employer, to treat our members, your workers, with respect. But that's not ultimately, I don't think, going to change the mindset of those employers who who don't have that mindset. I think that's actually a role where industry groups like our own can play. We actually launched not a mentorship program, but an advisory program this year where we're targeting mostly our smaller businesses that may not have the in-house resources in terms of proper apprenticeship development and that sort of thing, to share with them the best practices that are truly our leading companies are embracing. So I think there's, in a certain respect, you're not going to force a mindset, a cultural change, but a little peer pressure probably helps, and a little support, and frankly, I think consumer education about the buyers of services. Not putting lots of new regulation and that sort of thing in place, but people should ask the question: am I buying into a company that is investing in its people in a meaningful way, whether that's through apprenticeship or some other form? I think those are the kinds of things that people need to look at.
In one of the panels that happened today was women in the trades. One of the panel members expressed the view that says, look, if there's a real need for workers, no one worries about this issue of women in the trades. They'll go, and they will be hired. Fair?
Well, there is a real need for workers. Unfortunately, there are companies like the one I just mentioned today that are kind of sullying things for us. I mean, a large part of our membership is actually, we're a national association, so is out in the oil sands in Alberta, where there is a significant skill shortage for welders.
Mm-hmm.
For welders, we will gladly. In fact, I'm wanting to encourage some of my members to call up this woman that was in this article and say, please come to. In fact, thousands of Newfoundlanders do come and work on our sites all the time. But there is a skills shortage in certain areas, and unfortunately, we just need to find ways to make sure that these other companies aren't kind of ruining it for the rest of us.
As I listen to you, as I listen to some other people who've presented the last couple of days, I'm trying to figure out how far towards a solution could we come with better marketing and branding. How significant are the marketing and branding issues in this? Are they really a major source of the problem? If we could somehow all get in a room and figure out, better labels and titles, and we all came out and we all stuck to that in a disciplined way, would most of the issues disappear? And therefore, could a good marketing branding campaign that we all got behind really make a significant dent in the kind of issues we're talking about here?
You're asking a marketer that question, so of course my answer would be, of course! Everything is about marketing. Well, let me give you a small story from my previous life. I used to be the head of the Wine Industry Association here, and when I started, we would poll people, and they would say to us, we wouldn't take an Ontario wine to a friend's house wearing a paper bag over our heads as well as one around the bottle of wine. There's no way on earth. And today, with a huge marketing effort supported by the provincial government, supported by the entire industry, very focused around quality, now young people, when we poll them, they don't have a bad thing to say. All they think about is, Ontario makes a lot of great wines. I know the VQA. I would certainly share that with my friends. So there was partly a huge marketing effort. It takes a long time. It took us 12 years to get there. We will never win over the hardcore baby boomers who grew up on Baby Duck. But I know, let me just say, still the biggest seller in the LCBO if you put it on special. So, we're not all as sophisticated as we think. Wow. But marketing changed the next generation's attitude. So then you could build on something. I think the same is true of the apprenticeship side of the house. I think you can see that the college's marketing efforts, the efforts of others that are working in this field, Brian Baumler and Mike Holmes, the recession and the understanding of the value of trades for good jobs, I think all of those things are part of a marketing effort that is starting to make a difference for younger people. I don't think we're nearly far enough along, though, Harvey, and I think, we're always the federal government is always trying to insert itself someplace or other in education. This is a place they could insert themselves. They could actually spend some money helping drive a national campaign around this kind of thing. It has to be long-term, though. We can't get into the marketplace for a year and think, okay, that's solved. You know, we're looking at a decade-long marketing strategy that would change attitudes slowly but surely over time. And that combined with where things are going would make a big difference. The only other thing I'd say is if you're going to do all of that, the one thing you have to have is a really good product behind you. So I think we have to continue to provide really high quality education. We need the engagement of employers. And the last thing we need is we need really good pathways from apprenticeship, because one thing parents and students are always concerned about is what I'm doing terminal, or if I changed my mind and wanted to go from being an electrician to an electrical engineer to a PhD, how would I do that? They've answered it in Ireland. We have not got a clue how to do it here.
So I think it's a marketing problem too, but I have a sort of proviso in that, and I think that in a way, education, oddly, has been the victim of another kind of marketing over the last sort of 30 years, which is a very, very, very concerted effort from the, and I don't mean to sound like a person who doesn't believe in you know, reading, writing, and math, because I do, but the kind of drive of, not to name anybody, but like the Fraser Institute, for instance, to, you know, let's measure these things, let's get back to basics, there's core skills, nobody can read, nobody can write, we're going to hell in a handcart. That has been a huge and very, very successful marketing effort on the education system. And I do think that it takes marketing, but I think that we have to be very careful that we don't just focus our marketing on one thing, because we may end up in the same problem in a way. So that for me, part of it has to do with starting to try to find a way. That's why I'm happy we're working with HEQCO and other partners to go, how can we a little bit more start to try and speak the same language and go, there are some skills that are valuable, bottom line, and they can lead you on multiple paths. I think that you're right about the paths. But I worry right now that there's these weird kind of disconnects, even in the conversation about skills, because right now, not that I'm ever political, but I mean, the particular federal government we have right now loves the skills gap and the terrible problem we have there, and I think there is a lot of, but I'm not sure that it's going to get us where we want to go in terms of ensuring we have a very, very well educated population who is able to deal with change, learn, relearn, change jobs, suddenly decide, be able to go, have a pathway from being a pipe fitter to getting a PhD and whatever, and which is very difficult right now. So our marketing, I think, has to do with trying to have a little bit more of a conversation about why are all these, what are the new basics, why are they important, how can we shift, how can we go all the way back to kindergarten and grade 1 and start building those kids there, because that's where they begin, and not only having conversations about skills that are all focused on post-secondary, because then we have this weird gap between, you know, it's like they're two different lands. They are two different lands. So how can we have the conversation together, and how can we market better to parents? I think you're right in that way, that these are the skills that are important, and then not be quite so snooty by the time they get to high school, where we're valuing one and not the other, so that there's a sense that when you're in high school that things that you're building things that leave you open to choices, as opposed to shutting off choices very, very early, which is what happens now.
The example that I like to think about is actually MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and they were actually successful, or have been pretty successful in creating a stigma around drinking and driving. What we need is a comprehensive initiative to remove a stigma around the trades. And it even goes below just sort of thinking about the trades as a job opportunity. You know, there's an inherent, I say that I'm probably a broken record on this, but there's inherent dignity about doing manual work that we've completely lost in our culture over the last several decades at least. We just think all the dignity is in, you know, being a lawyer or a doctor, and that. But there's something good about building something with your hands, and it's not second rate, it's not second class, and we've lost that.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. But if we talked together about that, and we said this is a creative skill. I mean, that this isn't this or this, that there's an incredible amount of creativity that goes into being able to do that in terms of valuing it, in terms of how you market it. That it's not the thing you do if you can't do anything else, that it's actually exciting, it's actually, there's an incredible sense of accomplishment in it. So, and in terms of all of those other kind of base skills, they're all part of this too.
Yeah, you actually won't be as good a tradesperson if you don't have those base skills.
But you know, so I think you're right, because I got to say, if I hear one more person say that you go to university for creative thinking skills, I'm just going to, you know, because really that education is tied up in every single version of post-secondary and before that, right? You're all the way through your educational life, you're looking creatively, so absolutely. I think the other thing we have to bear in mind, though, is a lot of skilled trades work in industries that we also have developed over time a strong feeling that's negative about. So the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters sat down in one of the first roundtables that Premier Wynne did when she got elected, and they said to her, we are really worried about the perception of manufacturing as dirty, dark, and dismal. And the Premier said, and Dickensian. So, and it's true, right? I mean, part of our challenge is not just the fact that people have a challenge around thinking about the trades, but somehow or another, we have to rebrand or help people rethink about some of these industries that are core to our economy, and yet people no longer believe they want to work in. I mean, one of the colleges up north told me a story where they had a couple of industries who came to them and said, we'd like you to bring in a group of young people who've been out working, you know, in dead-end jobs, and, you know, if we send them through this particular training course for a trade, we can hire them immediately on our shop floors. They'll start at about $70,000 a year. They went through that whole process, brought a lot of kids in that were working in places like McDonald's. Do you know not one of them signed up to go through the program? And when they spoke to the young people at the end of it, one of the things they said is that they felt the opportunity to potentially get a management job at McDonald's had more inherent value than working in a manufacturing plant. So it's a big marketing campaign.
I'd like to open this up to questions from the floor. Yes, pick up your hand, but don't speak. I was very strict instructions. Do not speak until the microphone has been placed in front of you. Yes, feel free, please.
That would be me then.
Yes, that's the sign.
My name is Jay Peterson. I used to head up the building and construction trade unions in and around Toronto for about 15 years. So we had about 25 construction unions and about 70,000 members. And I've spent a lot of time over the years looking at how the trades are perceived by politicians, by educators, by general public, by kids maybe thinking of careers. And I'm so appreciative of the conversation that we've had on this panel today, because I think we've touched on some core things that are really, really important. These are good jobs, and I guess I should say a few things about the construction industry. To me, there's three industries out there, and there's three construction industries. There's the labor-ready temp industry, load kids in the van, go do the work, and at the end of the day, you get a little bit of pay, and the labor agency makes some money. To me, that's the bottom of the construction industry. I come from the unionized section, and to me, a lot of the problems that the gentleman on the end of the panel was talking about running into sexist things and things like that, it sounds to me like that workplace needs a union, because we don't have that in our unions. If any female feels like that, we have mechanisms in place to take care of that. And I'm also working very hard to change the perception of construction as a male-only workplace. These are great jobs with great benefits that are ideally suited for women. We have issues about retention for women due to poor language in our agreements that accommodate issues that develop. So we've got a long ways to go on issues with women, but they're good jobs. I liked what Ms. Kidder said about specializing a little bit in high school, making sure those core things are there. It's sort of like athletes. We have kids that play hockey or whatever. You think you're building a hockey player, you might be building an athlete. They might find another sport and use all those skills that they've built throughout becoming healthy and fit and training their bodies to maybe become a volleyball player. Who knows? And I think if you provide those core skills, it gives them opportunity to make up their minds. Grade 9 and grade 10 is awfully young for a lot of people to be deciding what they do. And I agree 100% with the branding. We need to brand construction as, good middle-class jobs where you're able to build a good, have a nice family life, and have a good pensions, and those jobs, the decline in manufacturing and free trade and things over the years, I think have gotten harder to find. And maybe that's showing why more people are looking at the trades now as a viable option. There's not as many of those well-paying manufacturing jobs as there was. Maybe I'm not an expert on manufacturing, but I think if we had programs that branded construction as great careers, and that we had programs that provided the basis in education for having those skills to come out, but then in grade 11 and 12 and stuff, had majors where you could actually focus on the trades that you were interested in. You could come out of high school with the skills that are advanced from anybody else off of the street that would put these kids in a great place for employers. They would maybe have their basic trade school in their pocket already, coming out of high school for whatever trade they were looking at going into. That's a huge incentive for employers. And if you had kids through grade 9 through grade 12 that showed and demonstrated their will through different activities, at the end of grade 12, you know they're job ready because they've been there all the time. There's their track record. Employers can take some comfort in knowing they're going to the right place, they're getting the kids with the right core group of schools, they've specialized in their trade training, and they're job ready. And that's what we need, is just a coordinated effort with a good brand and a good outcome, a good product at the end. These are
Thank
good
you.
jobs, and we should, I'm really glad that you put this panel together because you've had great conversations. So,
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Nick, there's in the back.
Hi there. I'd like to share a quick little anecdote. I'm a plumber. I've been a plumber for 30 years. And a few years ago, I was working in a private school. School was open, and I was lying on my back in a hallway connecting a chilled drinking fountain. So as I was lying there, two of the young girls walked by, and one of them pointed at me and said to her friend, "That's what happens when you don't go to school."
Oh,
I simply laughed. I thought it was very funny because obviously that's a learned response from parents. So getting back to this issue, the trade's a great choice for someone else's kids. My question is directed more about why this question wasn't asked at the very beginning of this whole seminar or two-day thing, because I find that to be one of the biggest issues with trade, with skilled trades, with apprenticeship, that it still comes down to an attitude both in schools and at homes, that it's something you do if you can't do anything else. And relating to the gentleman who just spoke, part of that comes with the branding of, it's a good job. It's not a good job. It's a career. It's a profession. It's something that's equitable, equal to teaching, to lawyers, to medicine. It's something a society needs. A society cannot live or succeed without skilled trades to build infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I just was wondering why this issue wasn't raised a little earlier.
it's a question for the facilitator.
Exactly.
I would simply, what's been interesting to me going to various panels is that there are recurring themes. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest to you, in fact, that this issue of why aren't more young people going into the trades was very much evident in the very first panel here, and has come through, and perhaps because it is the most central question, it represents the capstone of what we're talking about here today.
And can I add that the idea, I'm stuck in your athlete there, and the branding, marketing. So if you took that as your concrete example, as opposed to the kind of mushy one we kind of have about what education is, and if instead you thought of it, I'm wrestling with this, but anyway, if you thought about how you make an athlete, and the danger of deciding when you're 5 that you're going to be a hockey player, or even 12, but that there are a whole bunch of core skills you have to be an athlete, and that if in our branding and marketing, somehow that what we say is these are all of the skills, and these are all of the choices then, and we don't make one better or more important than the other, but that but that we go back, because even me, I got your athlete metaphor better than anything that I've talked about. I went, oh, that makes sense. It's very concrete, and it made sense in terms of you want to be able to have a bunch of choices. You don't want to just be able to have one. And even in fact, then you screw up your knee, you still have all those other skills. So maybe you're not going to be an athlete as a profession, but you have, you've done all this work on your body. But anyway, it's a stretch. But I think it goes back to this whatever, a sort of panoply of choice that you want kids to have in the end. And that's my worry about marketing just about trades or just about one particular thing, because we're going to end up in another kind of problem. But if we market better to say kids have to have all of these skills because we have to prepare them to be able to make all of these different kinds of choices, and then in our marketing we have to value those choices so that please God, be a crane operator. But I think it goes to somehow making the marketing is more about making it very clear what it's about, what you're trying to build here at the kind of from the bottom up.
The other thing I'd just say, it also has to be believable. So when our first advertising firm came in that we hired to do marketing for the college system, they said to us right off the top, you can't own prestige because universities own prestige in post-secondary education. But you can own the idea of higher education for the real world. I think, frankly, going forward, I would rather own that. And I think that that's the challenge we have. Is it's true today and for a long time to come, parents view higher education on a vertical hierarchy, right? University, college, apprenticeship, straight to work. And our challenge is to have people see it on a horizontal axis. What do I like to do? How do I want to live my life? What are my values? Therefore, I should do this with my life. And then I'll have a career that I love. I think we've got a long way to go with older parents around that, because I think there's still this internalization that university equals prestige. I'm a better parent if my kid goes to a prestigious place, therefore. But this generation, at least that I see, they're not there at all. And I think, as I say, as we move along the continuum of people changing their attitude to really it's about a really good job that my son or daughter feels proud to do and that gives them a good family life, then that changes everything. And marketing that's realistic around that kind of a platform, I think, can do a huge amount of good towards changing attitudes.
Someone, Hillary, in the back, and then I'll come to you.
I just agree with the previous person that we should have opened with this plenary session. I think you've opened a lot of interesting discussions. I am Associate Dean for Apprenticeship and Skilled Trades at Georgian College, and I deal a lot with students and parents in both apprenticeship and post-secondary. And I think you've hit the nail on the head when we talk about degree versus diploma. I mean, just a little audience participation. Your daughter goes to school for 4 years in university. What's the name of the piece of paper they get? A degree. If you go to college, what do you get? If you do an apprenticeship, what do you get? Well, you might get a certificate of apprenticeship if you're in some trades. You might get a certificate of qualification if you're in another trade. Most tradespeople will call it a ticket, and that's what most people see it as. That's what most people call it as a ticket. Last time I got a ticket was from a lovely person in a blue uniform. We have a problem with nomenclature in apprenticeship, and we have to address that. I can guarantee you that if you got a degree in apprenticeship, the public's opinion of what that is would change overnight.
Absolutely.
So not only do we need to change the nomenclature, we also need to recognize the value of what a C of Q is. If a tradesperson can go to Germany and get the equivalent of a degree status for his C of Q, but he cannot get the equivalent of a degree status in Ontario to apply for a teaching job, we've got a problem. So we can't promote the trades. without first fixing some of the inherent issues that we have in the nomenclature of the trades. And that still remains, and maybe that's a problem because we have 155 trades in one box, and that's a separate issue altogether. But we need to address those issues. And I'll get off the mic here for a second, but one other challenge, I think it's been wonderful not to hear anything about the Rick Miner report for 2 days, because usually at these, that's all we hear. But we've heard a lot about salaries in the trades. And yes, there are some apprentices making $70,000 a year. I haven't met any.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, most of the apprentices that I deal with make close to minimum wage. So if you're going to ask an apprentice to do 4 years in manufacturing and still only make $14 an hour, when they can work at Tim Hortons and get benefits, that there is a gap right now in much of the country, not in all of it. There's certainly areas like out west where there is a definite skills shortage in certain regional areas, but for most of the areas, there is a gap in skills versus wages. And it is hard for a company to say, I need welders, and we have this a lot in Simcoe County, where they only want to pay them $14 or $15 an hour. So those students say, well, why would I do that, right? So, but good, I'm really glad we're addressing this, and I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. In the front.
We just don't have the words for them to understand that they have these skills. And I think that if we start talking about critical thinking, problem solving, as well as the reading and writing, if we talk about document use and all the other skills that they're learning in school and that they're demonstrating, not just in school, but in their community involvement, in their experiential learning opportunities, in their cooperative education, in their OYAP programs, in their specialist high skills major programs, I think you're not only building the confidence and the language within these students to talk about their skills, but I think parents are going to understand, wow, look at this. This is really wonderful. My kids are learning all these skills. And these skills are really, you talk about the athlete analogy, these are the foundational skills that are foundational for developing other skills, like the technical skills. And we heard from Sarah and the apprenticeship, the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, some of the biggest challenges that apprentices have in terms of completing their CEQ is the challenge of problem solving and document use. So I really applaud the focus now on skills, because I think skills cross every subject, every course. We are all using skills, and we can only further develop them. So I guess, because I'm supposed to ask a question, I'm going to say, I'm wondering if we can work together, because Anna, you talked about a common language, and I really would love to work with anyone in this room about building on, you know, the leadership of the federal government in terms of the language of skills, and just building together. So when we're talking about skills, they're concrete skills like critical thinking, problem solving, all the other skills that all workers use, that all students are developing in our classrooms. And I'm just hoping that we can talk about this afterwards.
Well, but I think you're right, and I didn't mean to be mean about anybody doing any, but I think that then the education system has to demonstrate to the public, not just with it's on the report card, not just by talking about it, but which it does. I actually think these things are going on in schools. I think this is what we're doing. But that it is vital to demonstrate by saying we're going to measure these things. We're going to measure whether or not, and we're going to report on it. There is a thing that is intelligent accountability, and and accountability. People anyway. Let's not even talk about accountability. Let's talk about what we value politically and how we demonstrate that. And it might be simplistic, but I don't think it is. I think that we can talk forever about how we reform and make change happen. It's incredibly difficult in education. It's slow to do that. But a really quick way, which I don't think, is to go, we're going to measure these things. We're going to figure out, what our goals are, and we're going to report on it publicly. And then then it's part of how you change. I mean, we're working on changing the public's mind at the same time. But if we keep on only measuring success the way we do, which is literacy, numeracy, graduation rates. So we're not measuring our kids going into we're not actually looking at those other things. Our definition of success is that narrow in education, and we define it by what we measure. We have to change what we measure, because then we're saying we're going to pay attention to this, we're going to spend money on it, we're going to make room in the day for all of these other skills, because we're going to tell the public that we're doing better in these areas. And that is the next change that needs to come. Otherwise, if I am a mother, and I know I'm supposed to look at all that other stuff on the report card, well, I don't. Really, I do go, this is very important to my child, but really, I'm really wanting to know, did you get an A in this? And I think, I've been told over and over and over, this is more important than anything else.
One more question.
I only buy Ontario wine. Just to tell you.
Marketing works.
I think that marketing does work,
Yeah.
but what concerns me about focusing so heavily on marketing is that we run a danger of not fixing the systems that we're marketing. And I think what we need to also look at is how those systems are transparent and how those skills are transferable and portable across systems. And where does recognizing prior learning come into that whole system, and how are we going to make it possible for someone who excels in their trade to then move into a different aspect of post-secondary and apply those skills in a different way? So you can market, we can all, be Dove commercials, but we're not going to be able to do very much with it unless the doors are open in all those places for us to move into those different pathways. So I think we need the commercials, but I think we also need the pathways.
Yeah, well, you know what, I don't think any marketing works if there's not substance behind it, and I think that's what you're really getting at. There's a huge substance question for us. And I agree with you. I mean, just around transparency itself, I talked a little bit earlier about how you get into the trades and how you apply. Well, one of the things, frankly, we would suggest, we have an application website for college students. Anybody in the province, if you want to go to a college, you click on a website, you choose the college, you choose the program, and you hope for the best. Why not use the existing college application center to allow apprentices or hopeful apprentices to get into apprenticeship? We can certainly involve union training centers and lots of other folks that do this training. It doesn't have to be just about the colleges. It's an open website now that has other folks in it. But we need to figure out, from the perspective of early transparency, how do all our kids and all the parents of those kids figure out that apprenticeship is post-secondary education, that you can get into it like any other applicant to post-secondary education, and there's a clear, reliable accountability around how you got in. So I think that's pretty critical, and you're right. Once you're in, I was blown away by Ireland, because I'll tell you, they have a wheel that can show you how you get from apprentice to PhD.
And the woman who did that lives in Canada.
Yeah. Now, not many people, frankly, may want to go there, but for some reason, in people's minds, the ability to get there tells you something really important about the value of that pathway. So I think you have to make sure that those pathways exist for students who are interested. I mean, we're part of the way there in Ontario, but it is a very long journey for sure. But I think you're right. We can never lose track of the fact that there's a whole lot of work to be done around apprenticeship, so that when you market it, you're not selling young people and their parents a bill of goods at the end.
I promised the panelists that I would give them an opportunity for one final comment, but I'm going to prompt you a bit. I've heard a lot, we've heard a lot from a lot of panelists, including today, about collaboration. So we all do something. You do something, you do something, you do something. And there's a sense that we're not going to solve this problem unless we all collaborate. So I'm hoping that in your final comment, you give us whatever advice you can about who's going to bring together this collaboration. How is this going to happen? Anyway, Sean.
Collaboration is good. No, I mean, that's a good question. I think there's going to need to be partnership at multiple levels. There's going to need to be partnership between labor and management in the employer experience. There's going to need to be partnership between industry and colleges. on these things. You know, I think ultimately there's going to me, getting back to my earlier point, it's going to be either, you know, a peer pressure or up to the industries themselves to look inward and say, okay, you know, are we ensuring that the experience that apprentices or tradespeople have when they show up into our workplaces is worth marketing? You know, are we creating the cultures that are going to be attractive to people? So I don't have a silver bullet on that, but collaboration is good. We should find more opportunities for that.
Annie?
Well, I think you're doing it partly by having us here. I think that lots of times, you know, higher education doesn't talk to K-12, colleges don't talk to universities, you know, there's a lot of people who don't talk to each other. I think it's really hard. I ran into somebody whose job was called the Director of Strategic Collaboration or something. And I went, wow, that's amazing. I think it is really hard. I think that part of it for us right now, what we're working on is trying to build a way to have more alignment. So I know what we're doing was just phoning people and going, we're working on this. What are you working on? And is there language we can start to try and use that's similar? Like, that's the conversation we're having with HEQCO. I think we as an organization, we're a little tiny weeny organization, but we're independent of everything. We need to have that conversation more with employers, and we haven't got there enough. But for us, I totally agree. It's not marketing without substance, but that it partly has to do with how do we shift the thinking a little bit, where we go, these are skills, they're real, they're teachable, they're learnable, and they're at the bottom of everything else. And I love and I'm going to think really a lot about what you talked about the beauty of the work, because I don't think we talk about that enough. And so trying to get out of that idea that it's one thing or the other, or one is prestigious and one isn't. I think we learn. So partly you're doing the work of collaboration, because if I come here and I listen to you and I listen to you, I go, okay, I have to think about that too when we're doing this work, which is trying to change, and we're talking to people all across Canada, how we describe success in kindergarten to grade 12.
Well, so at the risk of sounding inappropriately self-interested, I would probably argue that colleges are already a good part of that solution. In fact, they are sort of the nexus between employers, government, students, community leaders. We have community leaders on our boards. We have industry folks that advise our programs. We are out in the community a lot with industry. So I think there's already some of that collaboration going on within the apprenticeship system itself and within the colleges themselves as sort of community hubs. I think, you know, this isn't really rocket science. I think part of it is just really having the energy to do something different. I think the thing that's most easy to do is to try to tackle something yourself. And I think what it really requires of us is thinking about what's the bigger group that probably would be helpful in tackling this. So just as an example, we're having a meeting in January, and we've invited guidance counselors who came to talk to us a few months ago. Geez, couldn't we do more about apprenticeship? The Principals Association, the College of Trades, us at Colleges Ontario. We've invited representatives from the Ministry of Education and TCU. And we're just going to have a dialogue about, listen, how could we do better at this? And what sorts of things can we all bring to the table, all of us who have an interest in this area? And hopefully something small will come out of it that we can build on. But that's tough. You know, everybody's busy and everybody's got a lot of stuff to do, and sometimes it's easier just to try to run at a problem all by yourself. So I think the big ticket item for all of us to think about is, how do we not do that? How do we think more broadly about all of the folks involved in these disciplines that could have something to help us with at the table?
And also, if I could just add to what you said, and try not to compete with each other, but go, can we all talk to each other, and we're going to work on this piece. This is what we can do, is this piece. Because I think sometimes there's a tendency to go, no, you know, either I'm the government, I'm doing this, or I'm whatever. And I think it's really great what you're saying. It's like people have areas that they can work on, but the talking is.
Please join with me in thanking our panel.